All right, guys, welcome back to the second part of week two. We're going to jump into South Korea. And so, if you take a look at the pictures I have here, when your mom says to her friends she likes those Chinese boys, that really just goes to show you how unfamiliar the previous generation is with East Asian popular culture. I remember every time I go to my grandparents' house and it's like, Josh, speak some Chinese for us. I was like, oh, I don't study Chinese. I study Japanese. Although I do study Chinese now, so they'd be right now, but before. And on the second one, daughter, I want to meet your boyfriend. I want to meet him too, mom. Uh, and there is probably her bias. And bias, they've taken this word to mean that people have their favorite K-pop group, but within the K-pop group, they've got maybe one or two people that they especially like, and that is your bias. Your favorite among your favorite group, and that's actually an important part to K-pop that we'll talk about later when we get more into K-pop. But this is just going to be more of an overview of South Korea. So let's get started here. So a little bit about Korea, kind of need to know. Established August 17th, 1948, so it is younger than the United States. I'm sure you know that Korea used to be one whole Korea, but as a result of conflicts was split into the North and South. Population of 50 million as of 2012. So the data is a little outdated, but it's hard to get numbers on population that are, up to date. But that being said, the number's probably going down, and we'll talk about that later as well. But relative to the United States and even Japan, that's pretty small. And so that's going to factor in as to how popular culture developed in South Korea. And like China, Confucian values led to son favoritism. So son is supposed to take care of parents in old age, carry the family name. Previously, people had children until they had a son. You just keep trying until you finally got a son and roll the die. But now the government's kind of pushing for just have one child and raise it well. It's not a strict rule, not like what China used to have, the one-child policy, but the government's really encouraging people to just have one child and do a really good job. But South Korea has had falling birth rates since 1970, 1.21 between 2005 and 2010. Obviously, you need 2.1 to sustain a population. That'd be one child to replace each parent plus zero point 0.1, I guess, to account for any early deaths or suicides, anything like that. So 2.1, they're not even close. The country is 96% ethnic Korean, with the largest immigrant group being Chinese. And that's not to say that there aren't, a diverse set or group of people there in Korea. It's just they make up a really small percentage of the population. And maybe this is normal for countries, and the United States is just the outlier of having so many different ethnic groups and making up a substantial portion of the population. But the national language is Korean, and English is taught as foreign language education. If you're interested in going to South Korea, they pay pretty well for teaching English in South Korea. I have a couple friends there now who make more money than I do teaching English in South Korea, and they're doing what they love. They love South Korea. They love K-pop. They love K-dramas, and so it's a good deal for them. So if you're interested, that's maybe one thing you might want to look into. And then religion. This is one of the most interesting things. Is you have 46.5% identifying as non-religious, 22.8% identifying as Buddhist. And then the very interesting part is Protestantism and Catholicism you have combining for almost 30%, which is really high for an East Asian country. Christianity was pretty much stomped out of Japan, and China wasn't having that. So it's very interesting that just Korea was really the country to be influenced the most by Western religion. So let's move on here. The Korean Wave 1 You maybe heard people talk about the Korean Wave. The first wave, and it's probably the wave that you've never heard of, affected primarily China, Taiwan, and Vietnam in the late 90s and early 2000s. It also Japan later with Winter Sonata, which really took off. But the notable works of the first wave, we're going to get the Korean drama What Is Love, that really took off in China, but aired years after it had aired originally in South Korea. The boy group HOT, which I don't think we were using hot to mean hot back then, so I'm pretty sure that's not how that was supposed to be, but I think the acronym is High Five of Teenagers, or Teenager, I'm not sure if the S was there. And then BoA, which is like the original K-pop diva, well, not the original, but the one most well known in the first wave, and not Bank of America. So yeah, and I guess this guy here in the picture of HOT, I guess the one with the dark hair is the leader. Yeah, very interesting. So the second wave is probably the one that you guys are most familiar with. Oh my goodness, the noise. Probably the one that you guys are most familiar with, because it primarily affected the United States, Asia, some parts of Europe, and it lasted a pretty long time, about a decade, not a decade, about half a decade, from the mid 2000s to early 2010. You got notable works from Rain, Shiny, Girls' Generation, 2PM, Big Bang. A list goes on. Dramas, You're Beautiful. This is when South Korean popular culture really kind of hit the western part of the world. And that's kind of what's gotten the third wave started. Although it is up for debate, the third wave is supposed to be very different from the second wave, so the first wave was more of a film, drama. Second wave was a lot of K-pop in the way that we know it now. They say that the third wave is supposed to be a wave of cultural and traditional art. So a lot of the traditional art from South Korea that you're supposed to know, maybe martial arts, Hapkido, Taekwondo, food culture, medicine. We did have somewhere in the middle, we had Gangnam Style, which really, was one of the first K-pop songs to get regular rotation and kind of mainstream attention in the US. There were cosmetics too. So maybe this is like wave 2.5, but the third wave hasn't happened yet, and we're going to talk about why in a little bit. But here's a great chart, just kind of outlining what it's supposed to look like. And if you look over at 3.0, it's supposed to affect the entire world. So not just the West, not just East Asia, but the world. And it's supposed to feature diverse genres, so just stars, K-pop stars, movie stars, not just that, but brands. You're supposed to become familiar with South Korean brands. That's the other reason why I made you take the brand recognition quiz, is just to see how close we are to this third wave. How much of South Korean brands can you actually successfully identify? And then, unlike the other two waves where the early distribution of the first wave was more of just regular media, DVDs, and maybe not DVDs, but VHS, broadcasting. The second wave was mostly YouTube. That's how it was circulated. It's kind of the age of YouTube. And the third wave, they suspect, will be social networking sites, which, if you're familiar with BTS, that's one of the things, coming from a smaller entertainment agency. They really made a clever use of social networking sites, social media, to kind of get their name out there. And so that's kind of the future of the Korean wave, is the social media. It's supposed to last for several decades. And it's supposed to now establish South Korean popular culture as being mainstream. Maybe people will go into South Korea going to learn Korean, saying that I want to understand my K-pop songs or something like that. So yeah, very interesting. So let's move on here. Some of these side effects of the wave. So broadcast content increased from 170 million in 2008 to 280 million in 2010. That's a huge jump for just a 2-year period. And you see this guy here in the picture has become well acquainted with our friend Benjamin. Export of music increased from 16 million in 2008 to 83 million in 2010. And tourists also increased from Asia to South Korea during that time period for many reasons that we'll discuss later on. But definitely the entertainment industry has been very beneficial to South Korea. So aspects of Korean popular culture. What is there? Normally I'd ask you guys this question, but I don't want this video to be too long. So we're going to jump right into it. Some of you guys might drive one of these. I thought about buying one myself. They have really good warranties. But Hyundai, recently the cars have been really good. The build quality. I'm not sure if most people yet identify this car brand, this particular car brand, with South Korea or Kia. But I think it's improving, at least in California. But I have met some people who have still think that maybe this is a Japanese car brand because that's all they know, American or Japanese or German or European. So, but I think it's getting there. We're getting closer to that third wave in terms of brand recognition. So, Nature Republic. I'm starting to see more of these in malls, at least in Southern California. I haven't seen one in Northern California where I am now, but it's endorsed by EXO. And so, you know, fans of K-pop are usually quite familiar with this particular store and their products. So, cosmetic surgery. Probably what South Korea is maybe most well known for in Asia. It is kind of the cosmetics surgery capital of the world. And when we're talking about tourism from Asia into South Korea, this is definitely one of the reasons. You can get cheap, high-level cosmetic surgery done in South Korea. And that's because of all the competition and because it's become normalized. And so we'll talk about this a little later after we do film in South Korea, because we're going to watch a film related to cosmetic surgery and beauty. But this is definitely something that has brought in a lot of money for South Korea. Video games, particularly MMORPGs. So if you're a PC gamer and you like the massive multiplayer online RPGs, you're probably familiar with some of the major Korean titles. Terra, Blade and Soul, which is very heavily Chinese inspired, Ion, and Black Deserts. Yeah, but again, PC games. So if you've read the chapter on PC bangs in South Korea, you'll understand the connection, the strong connection between PCs and South Korea. So, and then we have food, and Southern California's got a huge, there's a broad selection of South Korean restaurants for you to choose from. I think most people have tried at least some form of South Korean cuisine. I would say still that they've got a ways to go in terms of familiarity in the rest of the United States. For something like to compete with something like sushi or ramen, which has become pretty well known throughout pretty much any part of the United States. So, but I think they're getting there. So again, we're slowly approaching that third wave that incorporates food culture, brand culture, traditional culture, and so eventually we'll get there, I think. And then esports. Another thing that South Korea is well known for. Most of these are PC games. So you have StarCraft, League of Legends, Overwatch. And this is a big thing. These guys are superstars in South Korea. And actually, this serves as a perfect transition. We're going to actually talk about esports next. So we'll just jump right into that. But before we go into that, there's a huge amount of history that you should know that kind of led into this whole development of esports. So question for thought. If the U.S. went into a large amount of unpayable debt today, for whatever reason, invested in too many laser-mounted attack sharks, I think that was actually a thing, and the government asked you to donate your assets to overcome the hardship, would you do it? Most of you guys are probably like, no, especially maybe you guys have felt mistreated by the government, so on and so forth, maybe not feeling too patriotic. But most people really wouldn't make the sacrifice, I think. Some people would, some people wouldn't. So, a little sidetracked here, but the first genre of esports, the scene, what was it centered around? The game/genre. What do you think? I'll give you 5 seconds to guess. Had to be competitive, right? Sports have to be competitive, so it couldn't be anything that you play alone. It was actually Quake, first-person shooter, and if you're old enough to know, PC games used to look like this. Yeah, they used to have competition, and so this was kind of the first game that esports was kind of really focused around. So we're going to move on here. So one of the biggest things that affected the development of esports in South Korea is going to be the Asian financial crisis in South Korea. It was the mid to late 1990s. The U.S. economy was booming. Asian economies were actually slowing, though. And you had a lot of investment panics, loan defaults, loose lending policies, currency devaluations. It affected mostly Korea, Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia. And some of those things look highly familiar. Loan defaults, loose lending policies. Sounds a lot like the take we have on student loans. Yeah, definitely going to be a problem in the future. This is why we study history, so we don't repeat mistakes. But what do I know? So the cause, they say, was the stagnation of the Japanese economy, which was really just booming in the 80s, the 70s, the 80s, up until 1990. And it was so big that we sent, people would go to Japan just to study the Japanese business model. How were these companies doing so well? How did Japan recover from the war period so quickly? And so, yeah, the stagnation of the Japanese economy definitely affected the rest of Asia. Fall in demand of semiconductors, which South Korea was a huge exporter of in 1996. And then changes in the terms of trade affecting exports in the region. So, yeah, a lot of things affected this. But in South Korea, they called the issue IMF, which actually refers to the organization that is going to bail South Korea out of this, the International Monetary Fund. But they meant it to mean I'm fired, and very creative. But definitely a sad story. I mean, I read a survey of what people fear the most, and it wasn't cancer. A lot of people were most afraid of losing their job because it causes a whole bunch of other problems. So definitely this hit Korea pretty hard. So the International Monetary Fund is a security blanket for countries that experience major economic issues. So the IMF is going to prepare $60 billion of bailout package for Korea, 19.5 of which was actually a loan. So it's not free. You're required to make a certain amount of structural reforms so that it doesn't happen again. So it comes with conditions. So they need to increase transparency for fiscal, corporate, and banking sectors. So everything that was going on in terms of finances had to be clear to the public, breaking close ties between business and government. So the conglomerates in South Korea were very closely tied to the government, and they wanted to kind of cut that tie so that to reduce the amount of corruption or money that just kind of disappears. And then increase foreign participation in domestic financial markets. So they wanted to open up South Korean markets to foreign products. So those were the conditions. And obviously South Korea wasn't in a position to decline. But the gold campaign, and this is what I was talking about earlier on the first slide when we started to transition into esports. Let's overcome the currency crisis by collecting gold. The value of gold holds pretty strong. It was a campaign to encourage Korean citizens to donate their gold for the country. So people were literally taking their chains, their jewelry, all of their gold, and actually donating it. And large corporations chipped in as well. Samsung, Daewoo, Hyundai. They lent their marketing power to bring attention to the campaign. So running commercials, ads in newspapers, things like that. One of the famous athletes in South Korea donated 31.5 ounces of gold in trophies and medals during his 5-year career, which only amounted to about $9,000. But the average person donated about 65 grams, which at the time was $640. And so they collected 226 metric tons of gold, valued at $2.2 billion. So they didn't really put too much of a dent in that loan, but the fact that the country was able to come together to kind of get out of a tough situation, even though they weren't directly responsible for it, is really amazing. And I think that's something that you wouldn't see in the United States, despite the U.S. being known for patriotism and everything. I think that you see that most, maybe best represented here in the gold campaign of South Korea. So let's move on. So connection to esports. Financial crisis, IMF, I'm fired. So if you're fired, you lost work and you need entertainment because you just can't sit at home bored all day. So video games were the cheap, easy solution. So I mean, it was real. There were traveling or going out. People didn't have money. So a video game, once you pay for it, it doesn't really cost anything after that. So it was very cost efficient. You might ask, why not consoles though? And that's because most consoles were Japanese made. And again, we've got this bad blood between Japan and South Korea because of World War II. They actually banned Japanese products. Difficult to import products. It wasn't good for social standing. You're seen as somewhat of a traitor to the country if you're caught importing Japanese products. There were illegal imports, like Samsung made the Super Aladdin Boy, which I think was supposed to be a fake Sega Genesis. I'm not sure if it could actually play the Japanese games. It probably could. But PCs were already common in South Korea, so they didn't need consoles. And so if you've read the chapter, you'll understand perfectly well why that is. So let's keep going. StarCraft. So StarCraft is like the game that South Korea is best known for in terms of esports. It was the beginning. And so it officially starts on PC. So consoles didn't provide any means for competitive play. I mean, you couldn't really connect to each other until later on. But PC, you could connect to and play against each other over the internet or local area network. So the South Korean government investment in IT and the infrastructure for the internet was to help rebound from the financial crisis. And that really helped kind of, develop the esports industry as well, because South Korea to this day still has one of the best infrastructures for internet and some of the fastest internet in the world. So important aspects of StarCraft, why they played it. One, it's not Japanese. Two, it was cheap. It was easy to pirate if you needed to steal and still have access to local area network play. And with local area network play, all you needed was a PC bong to do so. So you could play with anybody without internet access in the PC cafe. And it was fun. It was very cooperative. So this was very similar to the Japanese arcade scene, where it was competitive. And East Asian games traditionally prefer like RPGs or real-time strategy, something that you can kind of work together. It was definitely games that are less violent, and we'll talk about that later as well. But so yeah, StarCraft was perfect for South Korea, and so that's kind of what's going to get esports started here. So it doesn't really get big until you get corporate involvement. Companies like Samsung promoted tournaments on TV channels. And South Korea pretty much pioneered the transition from analog to digital broadcasting, which is going to cheapen the broadcasting cost and made esports broadcast possible. So it's very difficult to broadcast something on analog TV. But when you have broadcasts over the internet, it was much cheaper. You didn't need all the equipment. It was... So some more factors here, lack of dominating classic sports. So South Korea wasn't really that great at other sports. Soccer, no. No NBA really. NFL, nope. No real local sports heroes. Maybe baseball. Baseball, something that one of the few countries that excels in baseball, actually plays baseball, South Korea. But the corporation saw an economic opportunity. They saw we could make money off of this. This could be the next big thing. And you want to think about it this way. These PC cafes were so common, so easy to have access to, that it was something that a dream that the youth could aspire to. So think of it as like basketball. All you need to play basketball is a basketball on a court. And in SoCal and pretty much a lot of parts of California, there's so many basketball courts that are just open and ready for you to use that it's very easy to see how children might aspire to be a basketball star one day. The same thing applies for PC cafes. So the first pro gamers, teams originally competed within PC bongs. So it was like teams that would locally go to the regularly go to these PC bongs would form teams and compete with each other. And eventually they established PC bong versus PC bong competitions. They were sponsored by the PC cafe owners. And the reason why they did this is because it would bring publicity to their PC cafe and ultimately bring in more revenue. And eventually you get the Korean electronic and telecom companies associating themselves with StarCraft and esports. And so then you get sponsored teams, marketed events, created teams, so that each of these companies is going to have its own corporate team that competes in esports. And so StarCraft, as popular as it was, the StarCraft League officially ended in 2016. This was because other games were getting more attention, League of Legends, Overwatch. And South Korea to this day is still the best country when it comes to esports for particular games, not all games, but yeah. So the benefits, right? Because there's got to be benefits. So this picture is going to cover my face, or my face will cover this picture. I'm not sure which, but free housing, and you get a really nice house. This is one team's house here, featured in the picture. Free water, free electricity, free coaches and trainers, free food and gaming necessities. All of these are going to be provided by the sponsor. All you're required to do is practice, and when a competition comes, win. And also advertise products and things like that. But salary, they actually have a salary. And it's going to vary depending on which league your team is going to participate in. But it varies between $12,500 to $50,000 and doesn't include win bonuses. That's a lot of money. That's more money than I make. I'm crying right now. Obviously, I've gotten into the wrong field. I should have played Overwatch for a living. But the comparison, Major League Soccer, I think is around $53,000 minimum. So when you're trying to, you're getting involved in the debate whether esports is actually a sport, in terms of benefits, they're definitely on par, at least with some of the major sports. The exception being the American leagues, where players just make ridiculous amounts of money. But relative to the rest of the world, it's pretty good. And so now, obviously, we're going to have this problem. Once you have this esports concept being a real career, something to aspire for, and all these opportunities and the PC bongs being so available, or having your own PC, gaming addiction becomes a problem. And so it's estimated that 10% of Korean teenagers experience addiction to games. And so the government's tried several things to kind of solve this problem, but some express violent tendencies as a result, anger issues associated with losses in the game. Some people call it, raging or rage quitting. 20-hour play sessions on weekends, 10 to 14-hour play sessions on school days. In such an academically competitive society, it's really bad for someone to spend that much time playing games. Maybe that work in the United States, since most people don't take high school too seriously. But in a country like South Korea, where it's highly competitive, and that how well you do in high school is actually relevant to your future, it's a problem. So the government has been active in combating the issue, and so you guys have watched the video on South Korea's internet addicts. So they have rehab centers, the Internet Dream Village, nice name. You don't want to call it rehab, it's just negative. You don't want to attach negativity to something that's supposed to encourage positivity. It's $3,000 per day. I believe it's paid for by the South Korean government. You have zero access to technology for over a month. Some people might see that as torture. Some of us can't go without an internet connection for half a day, let alone 1 month. And so they're encouraged to meet face to face to discuss their addiction. And so, the first step is recognizing you have a problem. So watch the video and see how effective it is. But definitely a major problem in South Korea. And that is the end of the lecture. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next week.